building a forensic toolkit that will protect you from evil influences.
Who comes to us today from an unknown company, and he's going to be talking about playing in the devil's playground. So, Dominique.
If I don't do this, I will, oh great, it's like 6 inches long. I'm going to be pinned to this podium, guys, so. Okay, my name is Dominique Brezinski. Topic today is playing in the devil's playground, and essentially what I mean by that is you have a machine that's compromised or potentially compromised, and you've got to deal with it now. And those who are familiar with forensics, essentially, usually most likely there'll be some state information that you want to capture off that machine before you shut it down to do disk analysis. Common things are looking at the process table to see if there's anything running that shouldn't be running or looks suspicious, looking at interface status to see if you're in promiscuous mode, might have a sniffer running. On operating systems like Solaris, you have a tempfs file system, and commonly Solaris on reboot will wipe the temp file system. So there may be some stuff that you want to look at there. There might be some symlink races or something like that, and there might be an indication that would give you a good idea of how you were hacked, or what went on that you want to capture prior to just turning this machine off. But essentially that machine could be entirely compromised. It could be backdoored, it could have rootkit stuff installed on it. Every binary on the system could be modified, the kernel could be modified. The machine is just entirely untrustworthy. So how do you get onto that system and attempt to look for this, kind of first stage set of information and have some reasonable level of trust? And we'll go into how much trust you actually can have while you're doing that, and when you should just call it quits and just power the box off. And so essentially that's what we're looking at. I'm going to put this thing back in because I'm going to get... Okay. So first off, I want to go over forensics analysis as essentially analyzing information, looking for support for pursuing legal action, essentially. Another way it can be thought of also is trying to figure out what happened to the system. Some people call it crash analysis, some people deal with different aspects of it, but essentially tying in forensics there means we're potentially pursuing a legal case. What you have to do in that case is you have to prove the integrity of that data. You have to, if you're going to walk into a courtroom, you've got to be able to say, what I have here and what I did analysis on is exactly what existed at that time when we found out that we were potentially compromised, and the information that I have hasn't been modified, I haven't altered it, I haven't, slip some information in there to show that some person's guilty that's really not guilty. I haven't deleted critical information that may prove that something else happened or it didn't happen exactly like we think it did. So you have to have integrity of the data that you capture in the first place, and you have to, and that essentially leads to integrity of your findings. And while you're coming to your findings, you really have to document how you got there, because if not, you're just another person saying, I believe this happened, and that doesn't really hold up so well in court. And you have to be accountable for all the actions you take. So essentially, this is just a little piece of how you try and maintain some integrity about that. And here and there I'll interject some comments about staying accountable for what you do, because these things are heavily overlooked, I think, in the corporate environment when people go to deal with potential compromises. Essentially, people usually just come up to machines, they jump on them, they start looking around, they may duplicate the disk, they'll make one copy, it depends on what they do. They might rebuild the machine, they might call law enforcement, they might not. If they do, they've probably destroyed every ounce of good evidence they had, and even if they have evidence that they can figure out what happened, it may not be admissible. And even though some cases have been won with relatively lousy data, it's just waiting for a really good defense lawyer to get involved here and tear apart pretty much everything that most people do these days. So I'm just going to make pokes there. So our objective as an incident response and forensics analysis person is to not cause any more damage than already has occurred. And I'm really coming to this from, I work in an e-commerce environment with very mission critical stuff going on, and downtime costs millions of dollars. And there's certain data that if I was to corrupt or lose while trying to do forensics analysis, we'd be screwed as a company. So my objective, number one, is to not do any more harm. Two is to carry out the necessary operations and gather the first round evidence. I don't want to lose any unnecessary evidence. So, it's a really fine trade-off between how I go about and when I make a call to go, okay, I'm just going to forego certain state information because I think it's just too risky to get on that box, and I'm just going to power it off and do an analysis and fail over to another machine. And then we want to really preserve the evidence, and there's a lot of system state information, and depending on what kind of hacker you're dealing with or person treating your system, some of it's very script kiddie-ish and you're just going to have telltale signs and it's really easy to figure out what's going on. But if somebody penetrated your system and it went unnoticed and they've been in there for a little while and they've had time to weasel their way in, there may be some very complex things that take a lot of analysis to look for. So those are kind of my objectives as going in for incident response. So today's situations, commercial operating systems suck. They have no security, and they're not tamper resistant, and it's very hard to make a tamper resistant installation. If anybody's tried to build, say, a web server using read-only media and booting off CD-ROM, you'll get a system that can handle 3 users, and it may have some integrity and be tamper resistant. But realistically speaking, doing a tamper-resistant system is very difficult these days with what we're given from a commercial perspective. Most utilities are dynamically linked, and what I mean by that is, as a software developer and on a system, you have the ability to build your executable, your program, and have all the code that's necessary outside of the operating system support all packaged in that one executable. Or you can dynamically link it, which means that there's shared code that could potentially be used by another process, another binary that is shared between the two, and it's in a separate file, and you load it up dynamically at runtime. And there's runtime loaders that deal with that and various issues. Systems are very complex. Gone are the days of an operating system that one person can know a majority of what it did and how it did it. And with things like NT, you can spend, and I have spent 5 years, looking at it and know how about 3 subsystems really work. And, the rest of it's a little voodoo magic, and I figure it out as I go. And so that makes it very interesting about trying to figure out where everything comes into play, and when you're executing something, what's actually involved and what code gets triggered, and when does auditing occur, and how trustworthy is the information that I have. All these things really come into play, and as systems get more and more complex or become more and more appliance-like, these things get even more difficult. CD-ROM writers are dirt cheap, and so there's no reason not to use read-only media for some of these things. Even 5 years ago, it could be prohibitively expensive for most companies to implement sort of a read-only toolkit, whereas now, it costs you $100. So. Common failures, which I touched on before, are the fact that administrators or investigators often jump on boxes as root or administrator and start executing things, looking and digging around to see what happened. And a lot of issues can occur on that. I personally could backdoor a system that as soon as you ran some interesting stuff, I just clean up after myself, or I'd munge all the information you get back and it looked like I never got in. And that can leave people in an interesting state. Rootkits have been around for a long time for Unix, and there's actually a current project. If you go to www.rootkit.com, some people working on some kernel mode hacks for NT that essentially allows, once somebody gets administrator, they modify the kernel and add device drivers that essentially let them to hide. And you'll probably never notice, except that none of your users will fail any of their access controls, because all access controls in the operating system have been disabled, which means that an anonymous user can come in from the network and access everything, including the SAM database and all files and all operating system functions. So these things are becoming more prevalent and easier to use, and more things are out there, and we can get into instances where, patching the kernel using a network driver that looks for specific strings regardless of what protocol they come in. So even if you allow, say, ping responses or MTU exceeded type things, if somebody can send one of those in and they have a particular string, and it'll be followed by a command, and I essentially have a very complex back orifice type situation. And those things are all in development right now by people out on the net. And rootkits for Unix have been around for a long time. People have been trojaning commands like, ls and ps and everything to hide all their files and their mischief. And some people have gone even further to make loadable kernel modules that would allow them to, get around stuff and be hidden. So, you just jump on the system and start running stuff. You don't have any idea what you're really running. As we'll see, especially in the NT space, there are so many places that people could put little things in, and you jump on to run a process, and now they've injected code into that, and if they weren't an administrator already, they are now. Administrator investigators modify data inadvertently while trying to gather evidence, and there's really interesting things like people commonly cite on Unix of taking a disk and mounting the file systems read-only and analyzing them. Well, I'm sorry to say that stuff on the disk still gets changed. Data files won't, but directory information sometimes does, and there's other aspects of the file system. So, it really depends on who you're up against and why you're trying to do it. If you're just trying to do it to figure out how you were compromised and try to have a little bit more understanding of what information was accessed, then that may be fine. But if you're trying to pursue a court case, God forbid you get up against, a good defense attorney who, hires the right people to tell them exactly how to pick apart your case. Investigators fail to keep evidentiary trail or records of action, and this is a huge one. Most incident response people just don't document what they do. They sit down in a room, and I've done this before, sat down in a room for 120 hours in 1 week, ripping apart a system, looking at all the slack space on the disk, putting together file systems, just doing all sorts of analysis. And we had like a couple whiteboards with some notes, but essentially we definitely didn't document 120 hours of what we were thinking and how we came to these conclusions, and what data we touched and how we did it, what commands we executed, any code that we wrote. And so it's really common for people to end up with like a nice executive management summary of, the 2 weeks worth of work they did on an incident response to figure out how they were hacked. And that's just not going to cut it. There's the joke, you watch any TV cop show, and the guys are sitting around hating all the paperwork they have to write because they have to document exactly what they did, how the case is going, where they found their leads, what they did, who they talked to, where they gathered evidence, how they handled it, where it was locked up, how it was stored, who it was transferred to. All these things come into play, and you have to think about them if you actually want to pursue any kind of legal case. So those are common failures that are going on now, and I think that even in law enforcement sector, we have a pretty close relationship with some FBI agents, and they're just not ramped up to speed as fast as they can. So they can give really good process feedback, but they just don't have the technical resources, and so they depend on us as commercial companies to provide a lot of these things and do a lot of this stuff for them. So available options, again, to clarify some things, I'm not talking specifically about what evidence to gather as doing forensic analysis and what tools, but simply how to get those tools together and deploy them on a system that potentially is fully compromised. So our available options are to statically link all our tools that we're going to use for forensic, and this also includes things like shells or cmd.exe on NT. All our system utilities, for instance, like shutdown or halt or sync, PS, anything that we're going to need, as well as forensic specific tools. We could statically link all these, and so if we have source code, if it's an open source operating system, that'll be easy, but in commercial operating systems, it's probably very unlikely. We can statically link them, and we can burn them to a CD, and so we walk up to the machine and we pop the CD in. It's a Unix box, we might have to mount it. Hopefully we have to mount it because auto mounter, it's not running. But So, we mount it, and so we have to execute some code that may be untrustworthy, but we get it up, and then we run our shell off the CD, and we run all our utilities. Another one is which we create an environment that forces all our dynamically linked utilities to use shared objects or DLLs that are on our CD, and not ones that are on the system or potentially compromised. Obviously, statically linked tools are better and easier to use. It's a less complex environment. We have more surety that the code that we run is intact, at least in the user space. But it's not possible for most commercial operating systems. For instance, Solaris and NT, a huge portion of the operating system utilities are all dynamically linked, and very few of them are statically linked. So, and you probably don't have the source code for either, but if you do, more power to you, and so figure out how to do the NT build, and it sucks, but you'll figure it out and statically link all your utilities. I tried to build the NT source tree once. It didn't work. And I had all the Microsoft build people around for me, and they couldn't figure it out either. So for my first example, I'm using Windows NT, since probably most of you run it, unfortunately. I spent the last 5 years of my life dealing with NT, and I no longer have any desire to do so. I turned down a book contract and went to work for a company that's predominantly a Unix shop. Thank God, my life is so much better now. But I'm gonna do this anyways. So on NT, if we have a dynamically linked utility that we need, and I'm going to segue here a little bit into another thing. If you buy security products, like critical security products, say like file integrity checkers or system integrity checkers, and they're a security product, and they have DLLs, you should yell at your vendor and not buy anything from them again. Because essentially there's no reason, or there's bad reasons for security or critical security tools to be dynamically linked, because there's way too easy for them to be spoofed, and if you get access controls on a directory wrong, or you just try and have a multi-user NT system, God forbid, you'll fail and you'll probably get Trojan horsed. So they really should be statically linked. Unfortunately, a lot aren't. So when you run a piece of code, when you run a program, there's basically a search order that looks for DLLs to load into its space. And so essentially these DLLs are named either explicitly at source code compilation time and linking, and in this case, you've told your compiler and your linker to, I need these shared objects, and let's put them in there. Another way is it can be done dynamically through code, and in which case there's this search path that's followed, and it includes a directory from which the application was loaded. So that may not be your current working directory. If you go on the command line and you specifically say run /winnt/system32/ whatever my exe is, that's the directory that was loaded off, even though you may be in temp or something. The next is the current working directory. So this is essentially like having the dot in your path in the Unix system, which we all kind of should know that is a bad thing, for instance, for, say, a root user to have, but NT administrators do it all the time. Next one is system32, followed by system, followed by the Windows directory, which is normally WinNT, but could be named to something else, followed by every directory that's listed in the path. So it searches all these places, and that's the order of precedent it searches. So for instance, if your application uses a DLL that's in system32, but somebody creates another DLL with exactly the same name and puts it in the same directory that you're executing the code from, or is your current working directory, your application is going to load up that DLL, and every DLL has basically an initiation function in it that gets called right away. And there's already Trojan DLLs out there that will do bad things, various bad things when they're loaded, and there's been several exploits that use that technique. So just in general, you should be aware of this search order when you're running stuff, especially when you're running stuff as a privileged user, because there's a big chance of spoofing. So if any non-privileged user can write to one of these directories and they have a higher precedent than where your DLLs are, it's bad news. Unfortunately, it's worse than that, though. The system creates an in-memory cache of certain DLLs. It's a list of about 25 on an average system, that it basically loads off disk at boot time, and it creates a memory segment that it maps the DLL into, and it keeps this known DLLs list. And if you use the tool called winobj, or winobj.exe from sysinternals.com, we can get into that a little bit later, but you can look at all these object directories that you don't normally see with any GUI tools or command line tools in NT, and you'll see this known DLLs thing, and you'll see all these commonly used DLLs in there. And so the reason this exists is because NT is dog slow, and this was a way to speed it up, because instead of having to go to disk, because there's such a heavy dependence on DLLs for everything in the operating system, so having to go to disk each time a new process was started, it would just map that memory chunk right into the process memory space and execute and go. So unfortunately, like, Dildog from the Loft posted an exploit that took advantage of this, because by default everyone could read-write this object directory, which means that everyone could add their own DLL code into this memory cache, and regardless of where the DLLs existed and how well they were ACLed on the disk, the operating system would just put this into the process memory space, and that init function would get executed, and that was bad. So you just looked for something that ran as system, or waited for an administrator to come by. You would previously paste your bad DLL code there, they run that process, or the system runs the process, and you have admin or system. So this in-memory cache exists, and like I said, there's a lot of critical DLLs, about 25 that is sitting there. And the system checks this each time your process asks for a DLL to load a DLL. There happens to be other mechanisms. If you go see J.D. Glazer's talk, he found a new bug and a problem, and I'm not going to take his glory away. No, he did? Right on. So, okay, I'll tell you about it. So okay, I'm not telling you about it. Thank you. So anyways, JD found this problem essentially where for certain processes, DLLs get loaded in it, and so it's a great place for somebody to put like this nefarious DLL that will get loaded into your application space and do really bad things without you knowing about it. And so go see JD's talk, and he talks about that and talks about some other interesting issues like DCOM and tracking people down that do bad things to your NT system. But and then, system functions can be hooked, your kernel can be modified, there's all sorts of other things that can affect this that you really have to be aware of, while you're running, especially when you have a strong suspicion that your system might have been hacked. So what we can do about this is we can delete all those sections, or at least the ones for the DLLs what we're going to use for our forensics toolkit, and to get the system down safely, or get the disk drive duplicated, make a binary image or two of it. We can delete all those sections from that known DLLs directory, and then we're good. And I verified that when you do that, then the normal search order that was about 2 slides back will be followed looking for the DLLs. So if you run your application out of a particular directory and you have all the DLLs it depends on in that directory, and those directories are all on CD-ROM, then you're getting all your good code. And outside of like the kernel being modified, you're probably reasonably safe from user land mayhem that somebody's left behind for you to trip across. So you remove the DLLs. Also, see JD's talk. He'll talk about some other things to look out for. But and then you put all the known good versions of your DLLs and your binaries all on your CD, and you walk up to the machine, you pop it in the CD, you execute, command.exe or bash, or preferably, or 4DOS for NT or something like that, and give yourself a working environment that came off that CD that's not using any user land code that exists on the disk. And you do your minimal amount of stuff, and you pray that somebody didn't mod your kernel and just left you hanging, and you think everything's good, and you leave that machine up. What we can't do, we really have no good way of verifying that the kernel has integrity. We have no way of really verifying that system calls haven't been hooked, that system calls have been modified, that, Greg's wondrous 4-byte hack hasn't been installed and there's no access control checks on the operating system or anything like that. Those are bad things, and we really have no good way of telling that. Maybe vendors will start building, I've heard rumors that Microsoft is doing it, that the kernel basically has cryptographic checksums across the kernel and we'll be able to tell if it's being tampered, but there's usually ways to get around those things, just like software copy protection. People spent years trying to write infallible systems for that, and they're always cracked. But currently we have no way to verify when we jump on a system that the kernel's good. So we can't deal with that. I mean, you make a call, either I'm going to lose everything that might be in the process table, I'm going to lose all information that's in RAM, unless you have some highly specialized, expensive equipment. But we're going to lose this information, and we're just going to turn that machine off, and we're going to dupe the disk on another system, and we're just going to do disk analysis. But if there's other things, if you're not quite sure, you've got a mission critical machine, you want to make a call, whether or not you should take it offline, you need to get on and look around. You're just never going to know if the kernel's been modified. So my recommendations for NT, and by the way, these aren't all inclusive. There's probably things that I've missed. I hope that people take away from this a sense of, okay, there are other issues, so let's track them down. But essentially, my recommendation right now is that you create a CD with all the utilities, forensic utilities, system commands, system utilities, and a working shell. And you put them onto a CD, and you find all the DLLs that all those tools use, and the Microsoft SDK, if probably a lot of you, if you work in big corporations, just get the whole big bulk shipment of like 45 CDs from Microsoft with all their products in it. So you get the software development kit, or you get Visual C, and with those come a utility called dumpbin.exe. And if you run dumpbin with a /imports, it'll tell you all the DLLs that are imported by that binary. And then you go through each one of those DLLs and you do an imports, and basically you walk down the tree till you come to a final conclusion that you have the full list of DLLs that are called by that process. So then you put all those DLLs off into a directory on the CD where the executable is. Then you run your programs off the CD, and you kind of pray. I also wrote a little utility, though I'm to remind you that there's actually a bug in the source, and I don't think it'll work with the CD right now because I try and open a file read write, but I'll fix that, and it's going to be posted on the Black Hat site. It's in your books after the presentation, and I have a copy of it here, but I'll get that fixed, so, in like a week, check back on the Black Hat site and get a new copy of that will work on read-only media. I had to hack this together right before I came here. But I have a program that'll run and remove all those DLL sections from the known DLLs tree, so you won't be running any untrusted code, inadvertently. And I also go ahead and take care of the issue that JD found, because it was pretty easy to fix, and let you know if that condition exists, it looked bad, or at least, spit out some information before I nuke it, so you can make a judgment call on that. So again, this is another thing is run as few commands as possible, because like everything touches the disk. Pretty much, if it, God forbid you use like Explorer to actually look at your disk stuff and try and find information out about it, you're going to like change all the access times and everything across all your file system, and any forensics information that had to do with the file system is half compromised or blown at that point. So you really want to use very specific tools. The same things exist on Unix. I'll talk about that. Have another little piece of code to deal with one of those issues. But like everything touches things, and if you use some of the tools, if you go like to sysinternals and you grab the things like watch registry accesses and to watch file system accesses, and you'll just see that like every Windows application just opens up tons of stuff and touches tons of things in this process of just doing like really mundane, like 20 lines of code worth of work, and for the most part. And so just you want to run as little as you get before you get a binary copy of that hard drive, and everything you do is another chance also for you to run across malicious code, or to get tripped up and to delete data that's going to be really critical or potentially critical in your investigation. Another one is go see JD's talk, because he talks about like looking at audit logs. So if you have a suspicion but you don't have any idea, he has some tools to like look at the event log and correlate all that nasty information together, so you can follow logins from beginning to end and see various other information, so you can get a kind of good idea to see if somebody got onto your system, at least through like normal NT means. So for Solaris is our other example, because obviously Solaris and NT are probably the two most used operating systems commercially. God forbid if you use one of the other Windows products, but I know too many people do. So in Solaris, it's kind of the same issues, but as you'll see, things are a lot simpler. The shared code search path, in this case, instead of DLLs, it's shared object libraries. There's a really simple search path. There's an environment variable. There are the LD environment variables that have to do with the loader. And there's an LD underscore library underscore path environment variable that takes, basically you set it to a value that's a colon separated list of directories, and it tells you where to go look for shared objects. And this is the first thing in the search order, so this is essentially what we're going to make use of to point towards a trusted shared object directory. Then there's a run path that's actually specified during application linking, and then there's user lib. That's it. That's the path. There's nothing else that modifies it unless the system has been, tweaked or, modded in some inadvertent or malicious way. Shared objects can and have historically been modified by people that break into systems. It's a really great thing. Somebody runs Tripwire on all their standard binaries, but they don't actually run it on the shared object. So you Trojan the shared object. Hell, you want to beat Tripwire, at least some version, you Trojan the shared objects that Tripwire uses, and or did use, or depending on how you compiled it. And just zero out certain calls or return false information. System calls can be hooked, kernels can be modified, loaded kernel modules can be installed, all those evil things. But again, similar issues occur. We can protect ourselves for the most part from application-based code. Not always, it's no guarantee. There's always bright programmers that have evil things on their mind out there, and we just hope we don't run across them, and most likely, in very few cases you will. But so what we can do, again, we can make a CD. We can put all our binaries and all our shared objects that they use. You can use LDD or truss and various other tools on Solaris to track down your shared object dependencies. Read the man page on LDD, because there's some security implications if you're running as root against certain things. So this is all stuff that you want to do beforehand on a known clean system. You want to look at this stuff, you want to get down these dependencies, and you want to make this CD-ROM that has your utilities. Again, not just forensics tools. You're going to need things like shutdown or halt. You're going to probably go clean version of PS, but remember PS is going to use shared objects most likely. So you want to get down all the dependencies on those things on LS. All those commands are, if config, are commonly Trojan in rootkits.
You can statically compile those.
If you have the source to Solaris, this is the problem, right? Most people don't have the source to Solaris. It's easier to get than NT, but if you use an open source operating system, you can statically link, all these things, and you can just build yourself a CD with all statically linked utilities, and it's a lot easier, and you just run those. And while you're at it, you just make yourself a version of the operating system that boots off CD and is like a clean, tamper-resistant running environment. So when you do come back to copy that disk, you can come back on known good code, and you can do your disk analysis on that with all your tools. But these are your own risk. You may be able to get yourself a version of Solaris that boots off CD, and you can sometimes use the install ROMs and get yourself an environment. But again, this talk is primarily you walk up to a machine that you think has been compromised, and this is before you shut it down and you want to take a look at it. So you figure it out, and then you pop the CD in. Unfortunately, you might have to run mount and mount the thing up, and you're going to do this on a potentially untrustworthy system. So unfortunately, people are sitting in this room going, oh cool, I'll just backdoor mount and never let them load their CDs. And but we hope, we pray, like I said, there's a lot of hand holding, praying, and kissing your feet on this one. But you create an environment, you set the environment variable, ld_library_path, you put in that colon-separated list of your trusted shared object libraries. Just point it to the directory on the CD, for example, /cd-rom/so for shared object. And you launch yourself a copy of the shell off of there, and you go ahead and use your utilities. You look around, you grab your info. Another one of these things is you come up against a great thing. Okay, I'm on here, I'm running my stuff. Okay, where do I send the output to? Do you want to write it to the disk and potentially write over? Unix is very good about reusing its slack space or recently freed stuff like very quickly. So, probably the most interesting stuff that was just deleted on the system, maybe the stuff that you write over when you pipe your output of, ls or a find or something like that, or a ps to a file. So there's those interesting things, and like I hate NFS and I hate SMB. They just, from a protocol perspective, they both suck. But if you have a mounted network drive, you may want to consider piping stuff over there, dumping the information off just so it doesn't hit your disk. There may be some other concerns with that too, so you pretty much always want to test this stuff, set up a couple machines in a clean environment and just say, okay, I have this scenario, I'm going to do these things, and like use things like tripwire to tripwire the whole system, and then do your stuff and come back and look and see what was touched or changed. And that'll give you a really good indication of what you're doing, how it's modifying it, what it's touching. LSs will change access times on directories and things like that. So, even the simple things can wipe out potentially like that link of information you needed to put together or prove your whole hypotheses on what happened. What we can't do, again, is verify if, the kernel's been hacked, modify things like that. If that's been done, even if you get on and go ahead and run all sorts of tools and try and look at the memory image of it and see if things have been odd, and you super complex and you write all this great code and got these cool things, and well, in that process, somebody hacking the kernel, they hacked all the calls that you used to look at all these things, and it returns information and says everything's cool and good and you have no problem. So there's really like no good way in commercial operating systems, maybe even any other operating system at this point, except cool integrated hardware and software that's completely trusted and does like one thing, like send an email. But we can't deal with that. And so again, these things, you make your call, whether or not you're just powering that machine off and pulling the disk out and duping it someplace else, or if you want to get around and take the chances, and only you can make that call depending on your system, what kind of attack you've seen, how critical the data is on there, if you have it backed up someplace else, all those things. You always have backups. From an incident response perspective, there's like no better tool than having a backup, because guaranteed in a commercial environment, they could care less about prosecuting in most cases. They want you to get everything back up online and want you to lose as little money and lose as little publicity and get bad publicity and lose face. So your friend is either hot backup systems, clusters, backups. The problem is in like clustered systems and hot backups, if your machine was popped and somebody got root on it, most likely when you fail over that other box, they'll pop it exactly the same way because it's configured exactly as the other one was. So backups are often a good place because you can build a fresh machine, you can patch it up, and you can copy over all your data that's good and non-executable, and check it out. Essentially, from an incident response thing, if somebody doesn't have logs and they don't have, if they don't have backups, there's pretty much nothing you can do for them. You can try and get creative, and you'll put a lot of sweat equity in it, and you'll get a mediocre result. So, I hate to slam anybody, but like eBay went through that whole thing. When they got hacked, they had a miserable time. They had machines, they'd rebuild them, and they get broken right into again. They went apparently for, and this is secondhand information, but they went for, a week or two where they just kept having to fend people off and take machines down and rebuild them. And, they didn't have a good backup strategy, and they just got hosed, and it ended up costing them a huge amount of money. So you just don't want to be in that position, because guaranteed your boss is not going to look at you too good. My conclusions, unfortunately, are sad, but I'm always kind of truthful in that way, and my life is depressing and pathetic, and I want to get out of security soon. But There are no good, truly safe solutions for this problem currently. I mean, like I said, people make kernel hacks, and you power the disk off, you lose some information, and do some forensics analysis, and see if you can figure it out. You may or may not come up with the problem or the solution. And answer the questions that you need answered, or your boss wants answered, or the CEO wants answered, or whoever else. And there are lots of other people who want answers to certain kinds of questions, and especially when your stock options are tied to this whole thing. Everybody under the table. Okay, so anyways, oh man. Wait, I have code to look at. All right. So, yeah. There's no truly safe solutions. You can protect yourself from any userland threats, but not from kernel modifications and kernel threats. And especially in things like NT, man, userland is so ugly and complex and written by so many ex-Office developers that you can't figure out anything. Like it's modified kernels or the devil's work, and if you're playing with somebody who does that stuff to you, I mean, it's gonna become script kiddie-ish, soon enough, and then we all are just broken and should get different jobs. But I mean, right now, people who are writing device drivers for NT, there's only a couple of them that are out there, doing security-related, interesting, kind of evil, malicious, but cool things. But it will become kind of common, just as rootkits have become common on Unix, but you still don't see a lot of people break into Unix boxes and do kernel mods. I mean, the majority of the break-ins that we deal with are stupid things, and I get people trying to spoof stuff to my site that's blocked at a router, and they can't figure it out, and they just keep running their stuff, and they'll run across the whole dread space after 50% of it has been denied. You just probably think you should give up, but they don't do it. It's fun. Take your time and think about the ramifications of everything you're doing. I mean, essentially, before you commit those keystrokes, think about how that command's going to affect the data on a drive and what you're looking for, how it's going to affect slack space on the system, how it's going to affect memory, what things it could be running. And trying to do this under fire when you've just potentially been broken into is the wrong time to go through these exercises.
The alarm you heard has been investigated and resolved. We are announcing it all clear. May I have your attention, please? The alarm you heard has been investigated and resolved. We are announcing it all clear. We apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you.
So, Yeah, test out your techniques. Like I said, like Tripwire, I mean, not only from an operational front, I should say any cryptographic file integrity checker. In this case, it actually doesn't have to be really cryptographic. You could use any old checksum. Set up a system, take your standard, if you have a standard server platform, build one to spec and jump on it and start kind of going through, well, what would I do to track down this information? Run those commands, or after you built the system, take a CRC or a checksum or a cryptographic checksum of the file system, run these utilities, and after each one, take another pass and take a look and see what's been modified, kind of get an understanding that, feel through these things. You'll come across, you come across a lot of stuff, and then just when you go out into the field, you just be all that much more intelligent about what potentially is modified when people do things, what you should be looking for as far as data and information and evidence on the file system or in memory or the interfaces. So really just kind of going through that exercise is the best thing that you can do, and you'll learn a lot, and you come across, I never thought I'd actually need that command before. Or you forget to put VI, on your disk, and you're like, oh great. You come across these things all the time. So that's just the thing. Remember, just practice, like take a look at this stuff first.
I don't use it for
Thanks to Microsoft, this code uses undocumented APIs. All right. I want to thank Dildog. He wrote the exploit for this program, and so I took his code and cleaned it up a whole bunch, because Dildog, your code sucks. Sorry. He can hit me for that, and I'll buy him lots of drinks later. Yeah, it uses undocumented APIs. This was the code that exploited the known DLLs problem because it has a really feeble ACL on it that allows everybody to replace it, even though the trusted operating system and administrators use this stuff all the time. And so I basically just trimmed out a bunch of the code and cleaned up some stuff and added something to delete a registry key. Essentially what it does is you take it on the command line, you run it, and as an argument you give it a directory that has the DLLs that your application is going to use. It goes through those, it takes a look at them, and it deletes those DLLs from the known DLLs list. So your application won't use any memory cache and potentially modified DLLs. So the code's here, it's in the book. Remember, there's a little bug in it, so don't take it home and think it's going to work on a CD without using it. I'll fix that. It's going to go up on the Black Hat site. I'll make arrangements, and it should be done. I'll be here through Monday, so it should be done mid-next week sometime, because I don't have a laptop anymore. If anybody wants to give me one, I'll fix it sooner.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
I had a question. You said you were going to run this in the deletes net registry before you get it back up?
It actually deletes essentially stuff that's in memory. So it doesn't actually modify the file system, as far as I know. But you know what? If it modifies that portion of the file system, well. Unless you, and here's a caveat about using this. If you really want to get hardcore and you're a technical person, you want to get into doing your forensics, then there's things that like most people don't do, and that's like dump all the memory on the system, so you can go through and like look at the process space and see what was memory resident at the time and all that good stuff. And you'll actually sit around and you'll look at the swap file, and you'll correlate all sorts of things, and you might look at these memory structures and take a look and see if there was like, you go look at the kernel 32 DLL, which is the one that the Dildog exploit modified. So you might actually like grab RAM, write your little tool that grabs all of it, and go find this data structure in RAM and go analyze analyze, the binary that's in there and figure out, oh, whoa, look, this one, gives me admin in its initialization function instead of just doing the standard stuff that kernel32.dll does. So if you want to get like really high tech and you're a technical person, you might be nuking some information here, though historically, like with that exploit, most likely there are binaries on the system that would let you know, wow, this thing's present, it probably was used. So there might be other ways to determine this, but with all these things, you just have to be aware of what they do, and that goes back to, again, understanding exactly what the tools you use do, what they modify. So if that answers your question. Greg?
I was just going to suggest a possible tool for an debug. I personally would probably just turn it off. I wouldn't trust the kernel. But if you did want...
That's because you write evil kernel code.
If I wanted to dump information from the running system prior to shutting it down, I would suggest installing a product called Softice.
Yeah, but...
One hotkey freeze the entire system and then run all processes, all drivers, interrogate memory, and I think you could even dump from memory.
But would you trust running Softice on a mission-critical, like, web server on an e-commerce site?
I believe I would shut the machine off. That would be my choice. But
Right.
your call is to not do that. And so
Right.
that might be a tool.
But that's what I'm saying. One of those things, that's a good idea, but you have to test it. Again, this comes down to everything. If you install Softice on a system and build up, one of your production web servers or transaction servers or databases, and put that thing through its testing, and Softice doesn't cause any problems in your configuration. The other issue with Softice, so unfortunately, is that if you have a service pack rev, most likely you have a Softice rev. Am I wrong about that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I mean, just because you have potentially different kernels and things like that. So it might add a little glitch in there, but that's a definitely good idea. There's interesting things. More and more people are coming out with tools, and so if you can have something that you could just do a hot button, you could capture the entire state of the machine, that rocks. And so, hey, investigate Softice, but I can think of a couple issues why it might be hard to deploy, but it might not, and I haven't tried, so I'm no expert on it. But this code's in the book. If if you're a C person, it's not complex and it's not very long, and you can verify. It's provided in source, so you guys can verify that it does what it's supposed to do and nothing more. And I actually have another piece of code that weird to me, and I'm not like a total Unix good user guy either. I spent too much time on NT, but using Bash. But anyways, I was really surprised that there's no command to just give you stat information on the file. Essentially, there's a kernel API that just gives you like the access, the modification, the change times, and all that stuff off of a file, or actually any file object. And I was really surprised that there wasn't just a command that would spit that out for you, because it's 4 lines of code or something. So I wrote it, and I have it, and I'll put it up on the site too. So for instance, where this might come in use is you have a system it's running, it's like a tempfs file system, and most likely if it's a busy box, temp's also busy, and so like access times are going to be continuously updating. But if it's a relatively quiet system, before you jump into temp to take a look around and see what it is, because that'll modify the actual temp directory structure, it'll modify the access times on it. You can use like the tool stat, you just go to the root, run stat on temp, and it'll give you the access time, the creation time, the modification times on that. And so you can use it on any directory or any file. So for instance, even if you were mounted a file system to do post analysis, this is an interesting thing to use prior to entering into a directory where you potentially might modify that information. So you can just stat from like the root down and capture all the information and sort of have a lockdown on what your access times look like and things like that. So I'll put that up on the website too. And again, it's really simple. I've only tried it on actually true Unix or digital Unix or whatever the hell you want to call it these days. But it's really just simple code, so it should work on pretty much any Unix box, unless stat's different for some reason, but shouldn't be. I'll take some more questions if anybody's got anything. How are we doing on time? Are we running up to... Okay, so does anybody have any more questions? I'm looking, I'm not seeing. Hey, thank you all. Have a good night. Enjoy.